The straw that really broke, I think, and this is a pivotal moment in the story, is that he was gone. He left on some trip. I went into the garage. I feel like I was completely guided. There was this garage that was sort of like in the middle of the two units that were attached. At this point, he's stalking me. He knows exactly where I am. And I think he had other people following me too while he was gone, because I would see different beat up cards out in the front. It was this cinder block duplex that was mouse infested, and I was doing everything I could to clean it and trying to fix up the yard and do anything I could to just make myself feel normal. And again, couldn't get a job. He wouldn't allow anybody else to do childcare except who he approved. And as I went into the garage, I found this box, and when I went straight to it, opened up the box, and we're talking about a disaster of a garage, right? Client reports strewn all over the floor, old furniture. It was this pack rat that just shoved tons and tons of basically evidence into this place. So I went to the garage, went to this box, opened up a binder, realized that it was a journal entry of his. And I happened to open to exactly the right page. And he wrote in his 20s, "I'm a sex addict and a child molester. I'm afraid I'll do it even to my own children." And then proceeded throughout the rest of those pages to basically disclose assaults.
I'm Leah Denton, and this is Psychotherapy, a show dedicated to providing survivors of therapy harm a platform to share their stories and to offer language for those of us trying to make sense of our own experiences with the psycho in the therapist chair. This week, we're continuing the story of Leah Moses, whose fight to escape her abusive ex-psychologist husband reveals the devastating ways the family court system can fail survivors. Her story involves domestic violence, child abuse, and sexual assault. And if these are your triggers, we encourage you to check in with yourself while listening. Before we begin, though, I want to share a quick update from Rose, a recent guest on our show, whose highly manipulative therapist, who we call Chrissy, had an affair with Rose's husband while Rose was still her client. You can hear the full story in our episodes from September 24th and October 8th. After some delay, the board has come back with their settlement agreement. And to say that it is a slap on the wrist is an understatement. After some delay, the board has determined that the appropriate punishment for a clinician who has violated every professional boundary and betrayed their client's trust does not even warrant a suspension, much less talk of having their license revoked. Instead, Chrissy has a year to pay a $250 fine, complete 12 continuing education units, and 20 hours of supervision. If Chrissy accepts the agreement, the matter will be considered closed. It makes it more likely her license would be affected in the future, but in the meantime, she'll be able to keep working with clients. Many of our listeners have no doubt experienced firsthand that stories of therapy harm rarely end with any real sense of accountability, justice, meaningful action to protect future clients. When something is done, it often amounts to a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, the clients who have been harmed are left dealing with the fallout from everything that they have endured. Rose says she can kind of understand where the board is coming from, though. Chrissy has no other complaints on her record after 30 years in practice. And maybe the board thought this was a one-time thing, that with a reprimand and a little oversight, Chrissy can get back on track. Color me skeptical, though. Someone that cunning and adept at manipulating others is rarely a one-time offender. Rose says she may pursue a malpractice lawsuit now that there's an official disciplinary action on Chrissy's record. But understandably, she also says she's just ready to be done with the whole thing. And I can't blame her for that. But we will be sure to keep you updated as things progress. Now, let's get back to Leah's story. When we left off in our last episode, Leah had just found her husband's journal in their garage. A journal in which he described himself as a sex offender and a child molester, He wrote, "I'm afraid I'll even do it to my own children." This seemed like the proof she needed to corroborate her claims of abuse and her growing suspicions that her therapist husband was abusing not just her, but their kids. So she immediately took the journal to authorities. The detective she met with seemed to take this new evidence seriously and told her she needed to compile as many details as possible and that the format didn't matter. And some people even scribble things on the back of a napkin. All she needed to do was put as much as she could into writing. Leah had another day before her husband got back from his quote-unquote work trip. So she went home and typed up 20 pages. Everything she could remember about the times he had assaulted her, about the stories of abuse she'd heard from others, and about all of the creepy things he would say or do around children. For the first time in a while, Leah felt like there was some momentum. This journal was the key to what would unlock everything. And maybe now she could get some real protection for her and her kids.
So hopeful. Really, really hopeful. This guy's going to listen to me. He's going to read this. He's going to read my story. He's going to corroborate it and compare it to these writings in this journal. Now I have evidence. Now I don't have to have the broken arm, which I don't think that he'll ever actually do. It was mostly like sexual, psychological, all of that. And I went back to him the next day. He's like, come back in and come pick this up. I had even found this computer tower, this hard drive tower. It's going to have all the evidence that I need. It very, very likely it's going to have child porn and everything else because he would go through hard drives like you've never seen before. And of course, that happens when you download everything. But when I went back in, he said, this is really long. This is too long. This is too much. I appreciate all the details, but I've checked with some colleagues, and honestly, it's bad that he's saying that he's a sex addict and a child molester, word for word. But I could also say that I'm a millionaire, and I'm not. So there's really not a lot of evidence that we can go on here. Good luck. Recommend you consider getting a really great attorney, and you need to watch your back.
Leah says it seemed like the detective actually did believe her, and he was even worried for her. Even though they had what was essentially a written confession from an abuser, still, she was being told it wasn't enough concrete evidence for legal protection. And Leah was terrified. Her husband would be home soon, and now she had a clearer picture than ever of who this man was and what he was capable of. So she took the kids and left, and once again tried to secure a protective order. No matter that this hadn't worked out before, she had to try something.
I had an attorney at that time, gathered some money from friends and family, at least have a retainer, and went to court. And I remember standing in the courthouse on the third floor, and there were 4 or 5 doors to choose from, and there were different commissioners in each one, and we had been assigned to one in particular. And he turned to me and said, "This is the luck of the draw. Behind any one of these doors is someone who will listen or won't listen. We have no idea. We just got to go in and try."
It's worth pausing here to say plainly, this is not how it should be. Like many systems, family court is entirely too dependent on the whims of individuals. Without adequate laws and protections, a case can hinge on the mood and personality of judges and administrators. Maybe they're hungry or tired or woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Any of that could mean real-life, profound consequences for people whose lives are in their hands. The safety of Leah and her kids should never have come down to a matter of walking through the right door. In this case, though, the judge they ended up with took her story seriously, and her husband wasn't exactly helping himself.
So we went in, the commissioner listened. I think the tipping point for this guy was he listened to the story. It was very, very brief. They only give you a couple of minutes. I had this temporary protective order. Ohm's dad demanded that he be called doctor in the courtroom. And I think he just made the guy furious. He just kept demanding to be addressed formally and kept interrupting, would talk over the attorneys. Of course. And I think the guy got sick of him after about 5-10 minutes. And he asked a very specific question. "Have you been staying home with the children?" to me. And of course, I had to speak through the attorney. yes, she's been the primary caregiver. And then he turned to Om's dad and said, you seem like you're discussing your profession. You're talking about how you have all of these appointments out of state and that you apparently are well sought after as a clinical psychologist. Obviously, you don't have the work schedule right now to be able to caregive to young children who are not yet in school. So we're going to give full temporary custody to the mom, and you'll share legal. And yes, she has permission to move out of the county, because that's what I was asking for, to be able to move with my parents. And it was the first and the only time that I had anyone actually listen and watch and absorb the personality and see and act on the facts right then. But I was able to actually get out, leave, lived in my parents' house for a while, started taking pre-med classes, and I taught figure drawing at the same time that I was taking anatomy. It was all kinds of friends helping me. We did the whole food stamps and Medicaid thing and hold it together. I sold my washer and dryer to pay for a plane ticket to go interview at Yale. Oh, I should back up and say, because of his degrading comments, your IQ is so low, you can't function, you'll never survive. I decided, I had this wild idea that if I did go back to school for another master's and I really wanted to do healthcare, I wanted to be involved in maternal child health. But I decided that I would only apply to Ivy League schools. So I had made this spreadsheet of every midwifery program across the country, and by rank, of course, and had every detail of the cost, the distance, how it would work out, all of that.
So Leah sold her washer and dryer on Craigslist for the exact amount she needed to travel to the admissions interview. She ended up enrolling in Columbia University and started grad school to become a midwife. It felt like everything in her life had guided her toward maternal health care. The travels of her youth, the themes in her art, and the harm she'd endured. It all helped clarify what felt like a calling to care for other mothers and their children. Meanwhile, her case was still very much active. She was looking down the gauntlet of almost 15 more years of family court ahead of her.
We were in full custody evaluation. At that time, I had full custody. My daughter started to disclose sexual abuse. Of course, at this time, this is exactly what happens. It's that they were in a safer place with less parent time with him. So it was only a weeknight dinner and every other weekend. And I think with a little bit more stability, then more started to come out. And as my daughter disclosed, she told the same story to 7 different people: babysitter, my mom, my sister, the pediatrician. So the pediatrician reported. He finally had a DCFS report. If I was beside myself, because now not only had I been violated for so many years, now what I had read in that journal was true. And I had to take my 3-year-old to have a speculum exam at our forensic CPS outpatient clinic called Safe and Healthy Families. And that happened more than once. And they said, "We believe you. We believe what your daughter is saying. We don't have any forensic evidence." And then they gave me some kind of line about if there had been this and this damage, and then we would have, whatever. So I had this temporary protective order for my children. And then one day the detective on the case called me. And of course, this is after closed door recorded interviews with me, with my kids, with the people who had reported. And then of course they tried to get him as well. And I had handed over that journal entry thinking, now the pieces will connect. Now they'll believe me. Certainly they'll believe my 3-year-old who is telling the same story over and over again. And the detective gave me the scenario of when he came into her office, and apparently she whipped out that journal entry and showed it to him. I don't think he had any idea anyone had ever seen it before. And she said he went white as a ghost and lunged over the desk to try to get it from her. When he knew he wouldn't be able to get the original copy, yelled and caused a scene and stomped out. The fact that she told me that is really incredible and unusual. But what was interesting is that after they had decided they couldn't get any more information after a few months, and of course I was told that if I allowed the kids to see him speak with him, have any interaction at all, that I would most likely be incarcerated for becoming implicit in abuse. One day, the detective called me. I remember the afternoon. I remember where I was standing. I remember what I was looking at outside of this tree. And she said, "Okay, well, the kids need to go back to parent time now." "What are you talking about?" "Well, we believe your daughter. We believe you. We just don't have enough forensic evidence. The prosecutor doesn't think that it's a slam dunk case. He's a psychologist. He knows what he's doing. Obviously, he's told you this before, but you're not going to win against him because we don't have DNA evidence. It really doesn't matter what he has written or said. There's nothing that we can do. So parent time starts now."
Despite the journal confessions, despite the testimony of so many other people, and despite Leah's daughter telling her story repeatedly and clearly, the court roller coastered from telling Leah she'd be complicit in abuse if she exposed her kids to their father, to now telling her she was required to let him see them. The more Leah learned about family court, the more she discovered that this kind of thing is far from rare. To be honest, the first time I heard a story like this was during a previous episode we re-aired in December, Molly's story. When she explained how common it was for family court systems to remove custody from the protective, or the good parent, and award it to a known abuser, I actually felt kind of skeptical. I couldn't believe that something like this could actually be happening. Since then, after talking to multiple survivors and going down the family court rabbit hole, I've learned that not only is this not rare, it's actually pretty common. Too often, courts push for reunification and joint custody, even when there are clear indications of blatant abuse. Many provisions and policies lack any sort of evidence-based justification, and many court officials lack any meaningful education in trauma and the cycles of abuse. Not to mention, in way too many cases, the abusive parent has enough power, resources, or manipulative cunning to drag out those proceedings for years and years until they eventually get what they want. When Leah was ordered to let her husband see the kids, she was able to arrange for supervised visits at first. But after a while, he managed to wiggle his way out of that so he could spend time alone with them. Pretty soon, both of the children were displaying intense, telltale psychosomatic symptoms. Digestive issues, biting, struggling to get out of the car when she dropped them off. Leah felt helpless in the face of her husband's scheming and all the arcana of the legal system. She was able to get both of her kids into therapy, though. Her daughter actually sees the same therapist now that she started meeting with when she was just 3 years old.
There's a lot of discussion now, finally, more research is being done on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. My children both presented with some very classic symptoms of toxic stress, and there was no denying it. There are for sure relational health risks to that. And so what it looked like for them was the classic sleep disturbance, definitely digestive issues, avoidance of certain topics. And I realized that this is not the external environment. Now, this is deep, this is internal. Along the way, there were several moments where I started to realize that the abuse that I experienced was affecting them. And then that moment when I found that journal entry and realized, oh, this runs much deeper. I think I subconsciously anticipated it because I'm not sure how a thinking person could miss the signs that a personality like that wouldn't move into all of those dark spaces. But when the evidence started to appear in my children's behavior, there was another turning point for me. Like, it opened up this new chapter of, and now what? And now where do I go? And now who can I trust to help me, to help them? And everything became about them. I would skip meals if I had to, and we did, so that they could eat. I completely ignored my own health, I'm sure to long-term detriment of my own body, but it was not even a thought for me. They became the most important people in my world that I knew that I needed to protect. And that's a pretty dangerous place to be when you are under scrutiny in investigations, Child Protective Service investigations, or in family court. Because the stronger and the more protective a parent is, the more that they're viewed as combative and contributing to the high conflict.
In our last episode, we referenced the Goldilocks mentality. If you come off as too passive, then people assume you must not be doing enough to care for your kids. But if you come off as too strong and protective, they start to wonder if you might be the one inciting conflict. We have very specific cultural images of what a quote-unquote victim is supposed to look like. And if you don't act the part, far too many people won't take your story seriously. And Leah's husband knew exactly how to manipulate that reality. He could use his education, his supposed expertise as a therapist, to help twist other people's perceptions of the case and their perceptions of Leah. So Leah's case continued to stall in the court. The domestic violence detective, who had interviewed Leah's daughter and the 7 people she'd disclosed her abuse to, told Leah that with a lack of DNA evidence and the fact that her 3-year-old daughter was too young to take the stand, not to mention her husband's professional standing and his ability to spin the story in his favor, the prosecutor would not be taking the case. It's just not a slam dunk, said the detective.
So the prosecutor won't take it. Here's her number and name if you want to call her, and gave me this really minimal explanation of why I was meant to then go against what they had told me for 3 months before, that if you allow, even accidentally, any contact with dad and the children, then you are complicit in the abuse and you could be prosecuted. So from that one moment in the afternoon before and then after, it was like completely different mandate. And I felt like a criminal before. And then to be told this piece of this collection of evidence actually means nothing. Good luck, go use it in family court. I mean, I felt like I was being thrown to the curb. And it was that same feeling of leaving with just a bag and thinking, who is actually going to support not just me, but who's going to help me protect my children? Now we really have no protection. And that was back during the time when I had really high hopes that somehow we would be able to get even a piece of paper protective order for all 3 of us. And then I think that there's also that argument that some people outside of these circumstances can't see and understand, well, he's done all these things and you have all this evidence. Your child disclosed on closed circuit interviews in a family justice center to detectives. What more do you really need? But I was told that the forensic evidence was not enough from exams, and to take your young child into a speculum exam is one of the worst feelings as a mother. But I think people think, well, you have all this evidence, so of course they're going to act. Well, all you have to do is just present it. It is not that simple. It is much more complicated and layered.
In reality, Leah knows that a simple piece of paper would not be a guarantee of safety. She was far from the first person her husband had abused, and he would find a way to abuse again, protective order or not. But it would have been something. A sign that the system supposedly meant to protect her kids were at least trying to help. But even that was too much to hope for. Leah was being ordered to let her abusive husband see their kids. She knew a jail cell would be waiting for her if she refused to comply.
I went to criminal court 6 times for not allowing parent time. And we're not talking about allowing parent time. The kids are sick. Hey, can we push it off to the next day? Or I need to change a diaper. I'll be there in 5 minutes. No, it didn't matter. I was not there at the very second that parent time started. And every state has a different statute, but they can become quite complicated. I would have 7 or 8 printed off papers to create a calendar months out so that I would know exactly which days were allocated to me. Both of the kids were early elementary school. I picked her up on the wrong day, took her home. She had a little play date. And I got a call from the police not more than 30 minutes after school was out. You've kidnapped your daughter. You need to bring her back immediately. The dad is saying that this was intentional. And I mean, they went into like a big spiel. And so I took her back. And of course, at the time I couldn't drop her off curbside, and he refused to meet me at the other location, which was the local library. So here I was in this position of, where do I drop off my first grader. It's snowing. Do I just have her walk some distance to his house? Anyway, I knew it wouldn't blow over, but I thought it would come back up in family court, and it turned into criminal court.
Leah had to miss work and hire an attorney for her 6 appearances in criminal court. And each time, she says, it felt kind of like a joke. Her husband didn't even bother to show up. But she considers herself one of the lucky ones, considering the stories she knows of about moms serving jail time for trying to protect their kids. So for years, at regular court-mandated intervals, she had to participate in handing her children over to a man who she knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, was an abuser. And even if her kids had wanted to disclose anything further about what they were going through, they'd seen no reason to believe that their story would make a difference.
I spent so many years hoping that somehow they would be able to articulate in a way that would be acceptable to a prosecutor so that I could somehow get them away. And how could you put that on a child from the time that they're very young? The expectation was so heavy, and Ohm would start talking, especially as a really young child, and then stop and have this moment of realization that he was starting to disclose. And then he would stop and say, I didn't say that. I never said that. I didn't say anything. Everything is fine. And so we would get so close to disclosures over and over again. But the time frame for family court is not such that they're going to wait for a disclosure to come out or to put the child in a circumstance where they truly feel safe and let them have an opportunity to have protected time with people who they know and trust to be able to fully disclose. There are never circumstances like that happen.
Meanwhile, all of this confirmed for her husband that he was above the law. Consequences and accountability meant nothing to him. He could do whatever he wanted, to whomever he wanted, and he had no reason to think that he wouldn't get away with it.
People approached me throughout the years and let me know that even when he was doing his PhD work in psychology, that there were multiple complaints from the others in his cohort where he was completely inappropriate in his contact with them, mostly women. He was removed from, I think, certain residency situations and reprimanded for ethical issues. There were people who told me that he had disclosed to them that if his advisors in the PhD program had ever found out what he had done or however he had behaved, that he would be kicked out of the program. He was disclosing this to other people. And I think it's that there is a common, I think there's even a term for it, but there's that inflated self-aggrandizement that happens with these kind of personalities, especially who are put in positions of power. And then they believe that they can do and say whatever they want to, and there really will be there's no accountability. I don't know what they knew, but he would say if they did know, then I would never graduate, I would never be allowed to practice, that kind of thing. So either it was swept under the rug or they didn't know, or, someone found out too late. But certainly, I went back to that college. I went to the Title IX office and talked with them with a couple of other of his sexual assault victims. And we together tried to present the case and tell them, you need to do something about this. At the time, of course, he's very much alive. He's very much in the psychology world. Somehow he was listed on their website as not an associate professor, but in some kind of adjunct position. We tried to explain to them, you need to very quickly remove this person's name for all kinds of liability reasons. And it was just kind of treated as, well, where's the evidence? Where's the current assault? Has something happened in the past year? Did something happen on the campus? They had all these parameters, and it was several years ago, and hopefully Title IX has been more developed by now, but it was very much dismissed. I don't think that department had ever, in their wildest dreams, would imagine that they would have educated someone who would later commit a homicide.
In story after story, there are countless examples of blatant abusers being able to continue unchecked because of legal loopholes, career protectionism, bias against survivors, or a woeful lack of education about trauma and abuse. And in this case, the reality led to absolutely tragic consequences. I hope you'll join us again next week as Leah comes back for one more episode to continue sharing her heartbreaking but vital story. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you haven't had a chance yet, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple or Spotify. It not only helps more people to find the show, but helps us to learn and grow. Thank you to this week's guest, Leah Moses, for joining us. And I'd also like to extend my gratitude to Bo Denton, writer of this show, for his time, effort, and skill, as well as Peachtree Sound, our audio engineer, for their dedication to quality and for bringing it all together so seamlessly. And if you'd like to reach out and share your story, you can email me at podcast.psychotherapy@gmail.com.